Discussing the latest additions for Arizona football and what they mean for this Wildcats, plus a completely revamped wide receiver unit.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. All right, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, now we are going to talk Arizona football this entire show. We're also going to talk about some realistic expectations, and we are going to talk about a completely revamped wide receiver unit and what are some of these other players that can be brought in and what to expect from them. So why don't we talk about some of the latest ones that are here. The first one would be Tre Spivey. Now, you might remember Tre Spivey because he was a player that in Jed Fish's last big recruiting class, they were looking to add. He was a guy, basically came down to him and Malachi Riley, and Arizona chose to get Malachi Riley. Tre Spivey is a really nice talent. Went to Kansas State for a year, didn't do a ton. But, with Kansas State, even though they're very, very good, obviously, I don't know that I put a ton of that on them because Avery Johnson isn't the best throwing quarterback in the country, to put it mildly. So that's obviously something to keep in mind there. But overall, Spivey is a nice addition. Plus, he's big. He's 6'4", 215, and that kind of fits in. You're trying to, get bigger wide receivers. That was something that Jed did a really good job of. Jed would always talk about how he needed to get bigger wide receivers so that they could, you've just got more of a margin for error. Now, you can go with some of the smaller ones. You can go with the ones that are, a little bit quicker. But overall, you want to get some bigger ones in there. That obviously is something that Arizona did. Then you got Cameron Barmore, 6'6", 230. This is an interesting one because he was uber productive, but he also comes from a school that basically I didn't even know existed. So those are always the ones that I think are difficult to kind of put in place and to really be able to quantify because you just don't know how good they are. Excuse me. And when you don't know how good, when you don't know how good somebody is, but again, he was productive, so I'm going to go with that one as well. All right, now let's talk about some of the other players in here as well. Some of the guys that I think are. Listen, Blake Gotcher, I think, is kind of the epitome of what we're talking about here. He was the leading tackler in all of FCS, but watching him on tape, I don't know what I really expect from him. And a big part of that, too, is that, in the films that you did see, I think against South Alabama, he just kind of looked out of place. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes you can go to a place and you can, sometimes you can really kind of step up and be a difference maker. And if you're a difference maker, then that's obviously something that's very, very nice. Arizona could use that, though. Obviously, you lost Jacob Manu. You're getting back. You got back Tay Brown. There's going to be a spot opening. I would imagine. I would imagine that starting spot will be going to another player that isn't here yet. But I would imagine that Arizona is going to be able to get in there and be able to get one of those guys probably sooner than later. We will see. As far as the other players on the roster, you get asked about or players in the portal, you get asked about Leviticus Sua. But, a lot of times guys like that ship kind of sails at some point where you're probably just not quite good enough. And that's really just kind of the case. So there's obviously that. Then you look at some of these other ones, you got a lot of guys that you're bringing in for bodies. And listen, on the offensive line especially, one guy that I am somewhat optimistic about is Ty Buchanan. We talked about the offensive line before. He is a player that, on that offensive line, you're going to have, you need bodies because last year we saw what happened and you lost 3 really, really good players. Generally, you don't get better by losing those, but we will find that one out. We're going to see how that one does play out. Now, the some of these other guys then that you're looking at that Arizona has added already. Again, we're going to go with Chancellor Owens. That's another one. I don't know exactly what to expect from Chancellor Owens, but he was productive. But again, that's Northwestern State. A lot of this too, as you can tell, a lot of this is just pure speculation because it's impossible to really sit here and tell you who you think is going to be good, who you think is going to be bad. But there is, we're going to talk about it in a second. We're going to talk about the wide receiver room and what exactly you can make out of that, because I think that there is something that this is something that this coaching staff has done a very nice job of in short order, getting this wide receiver coaching or this wide receiver unit up to par. Now, some of the other players though that you're looking at from a high school recruiting, they really like Javion Goo on the offensive line. It's a great name for an offensive lineman. We'll see how that plays out. 6'4", 280. Some of these other ones, it's kind of the Luis Akba, but again, he's 6'6", 250, but again, that's not big enough to put in the line. And it's going to be interesting to see exactly what happens with these players too that are coming back, Michael, like we talked about yesterday, a Michael Wooten, a Matthew Lotto. What are they going to be able to do? And I don't really know the answer to that one. And I think that's where it's going to be fascinating to find out how that does play out. Now, one guy that I think we need to keep an eye on, Swade Griffin. That's Michael Griffin's son. Now, you might know him from University of Texas fame, first-round pick. I believe he was there with all the Vince Young teams. Swade Griffin, somebody that Dwayne Aquino was really big on, and that was a nice little get up at that defensive back position. I would expect there to be more players that are coming through here. But those are kind of some of the names. And Kellen Ford, we talked about it at the tight end position. Kellen Ford has a very close relationship with Brent Brennan and his family. He will be making it to campus, top 25 tight end in the country. I think you could make the case that he was probably the best, that he might have been the best player in this entire class. Now, one thing that you do need to figure out is at that quarterback position. That's going to be very, very interesting. With the quarterback, how are you going to play this one out? Because again, you got in Sawyer Robertson, you've got in Luke Halgo. Losing Robert McDaniel was a big one because I think with McDaniel, that was a player that you could have seen possibly starting at some point. These guys, if they're starting this year, that's not a good thing. That's obviously a really bad thing. So I think in the portal, you're probably going to be looking for another quarterback at some point. Wouldn't surprise me if you get somebody and hoping that they can be the backup. That will be fascinating to see how that one does all play out. All right, now we're going to get into the wide receivers here in just a second, because the wide receivers I think are fascinating in all of this, and I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see how this all does play out. Because again, at that wide receiver position, that there is going to be a lot of playing time to be had. And when I say a lot of playing time to be had, I mean a lot of playing time to be had. So we're going to see how that one does play out. But first, before we get into any of the wide receiver stuff, let's talk about something else. FanDuel, check it out, FanDuel. All right, here's the deal with FanDuel. Right now, you can put down $5, just a measly $5, and you can get $250 in free plays if that bet hits. That's the cool thing about it is with FanDuel, you also know too your money's good, but you got to be a new customer. And if you're a new customer and you put down that money and it hits, hallelujah, very, very nice, very, very nice. Okay, now with FanDuel too, you got the NBA, you got the NFL, you got college football, you got college basketball, you got a lot of different things going on. And again, $5 for if you're a new customer, you get $250 in free plays, and that's where it's pretty cool. So again, check that out at FanDuel, FanDuel.com. Again, it's the biggest site out there. People are using it, and generally, when everybody's using it, there is a reason for it. So again, check it out. Also, you know that your money is good. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now, let's talk about this wide receiver unit, because last year's wide receiver unit was not good outside of T-Mac. So there is that. But they've done a pretty good job. First of all, something that we need to keep in mind too, Jeremiah Patterson, our good friend Jeremiah Patterson, has 2 years of eligibility now. They're giving that for JUCO kids. So again, Jeremiah Patterson, we will go with that one. So there's Jeremiah Patterson. Then, besides just Jeremiah Patterson, let's talk about the wide receiver unit, because it's been completely overhauled, and I think there's a lot to like about it. And so so let's talk a little bit about that. First, you've gotten in 3 guys that can play, or you got in 3 guys that can play. And I think the first one that you need to look at is, well, let's talk about the latest addition again. Let's talk about Tre Spivey. Again, wasn't uber productive at Kansas State, but like I said, Arizona's going to look to wing the ball around. You got Noah Fafita here. I think he's a better passing quarterback than Avery Johnson, so you've got that. Okay, now, but let's look at some of these other ones, and a guy that we probably haven't given enough enough airtime to, and that's Isaiah Mizell. Isaiah Mizell, about 5'10", 160 out of Florida. He's a burner. I mean, he had a Notre Dame offer. If you look at the 247 rankings, he's the highest rated guy in the class. And, that's something that I think you got to look at. He's going to have an opportunity to be able to come in and play immediately, because I don't know that anybody coming back outside of maybe Chris Hunter has guaranteed spots lined up. But he is Isaiah Mizell. He is, it's going to be interesting to see how they use him, because he's got a lot of ability to him. So we will see that one. But again, a talented football player in Isaiah Mizell. And then let's look at some of these other ones. Then you've obviously another guy that we need to talk about even more. Again, Luke Weissong. Weissong, very, very productive at New Mexico. He's here, guy that got in the end zone. Guy that got yards, he probably would have been Arizona's second best wide receiver last year. I don't know that there's any way around that. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of these guys that we're talking about would have been Arizona's second best wide receiver last year, at least from a production standpoint. But Weissong's a nice get. Again, a little bit bigger, not a total burner, but overall a pretty good football player, a pretty nice addition to this Arizona Wildcats football team. So there's obviously that. Then after that, somebody that I think is going to be very, very good for Arizona is Chris Hudson. You look at it; he was in Washington State for 4 years. He was a guy that last year caught for 700 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns. I can't remember exactly how many touchdowns, but either way, he's another one that has proven that he can be productive. You need guys that are productive at the end of the day. You need guys that no matter what happens, when the football is thrown to them, they can go up and get it. He's another one of these guys that pretty confident in what he's going to be able to do. But if that's going to be the wide receiver unit, then that's not a bad wide receiver unit, and it's pretty decent across the board, honestly. We're going to talk about one of the returners here in just a second that I think, could emerge as a really big time player. But Hudson, Luke Weissong, Tre Spivey, Isaiah Mizell, you added some decent players. So I got to give them that. Like I said, I've been pretty hard on this coaching staff, but you have got to give them that. Now, when it comes to Chris Hunter, looks like they're going to be able to retain Chris Hunter. Hopefully, Chris Hunter by the end of the season, I think it was clear, was Arizona's second best wide receiver. He was making big time catches. It's kind of weird that he played high school with Arch Manning, but somehow got overlooked. But I don't know. But Hunter's nice. I mean, you could just tell Hunter's nice. How good he is, I don't know. But you can definitely tell that Chris Hunter is a nice football player, and there's obviously that going for him. Now, the other thing too, when I look at this squad is, so are you done at wide receiver? And I think you're pretty much done. Now, again, if another player just falls into your lap, then I think you're probably going to be pretty good. You'll take it, but there's that. Now at that running back position, then I think you're looking at kind of a two-headed monster, a thunder and lightning type situation, where obviously Kedrick Reesino is back. I love Kedrick Reesino. He's super, super talented. Big guy, top 10 player, or a top 10 back in his class just a year ago. Risano's nice. Risano's got a lot of ability to him. So you got Kedrick Risano, and then you got Isaiah Motti out of Texas State. Another guy, I like this. He's uber productive. So you got those two. And then it's going to be interesting to see exactly how this all does play out, because a Wesley Yarbrough is out of Texas. He was one that Alonzo Carter prioritized almost immediately. Very, very good football player, and I think that he's somebody that you're looking at and you're kind of like, okay, but probably a year off. So I don't know that he's there at that point, but there's obviously that. So you got those guys. Wouldn't surprise me if they try to add another back in the portal, but the running back, it's not as deep as the wide receiver unit. Who would have thought we were saying that at this time last month? But overall, not bad. I still think, like I said, they've got to get somebody in the portal at that wide receiver spot. Another guy too, Gio Richardson. Obviously, there might be a couple things to prevent him from being an initial contributor, but overall, I like Gio Richardson a lot. Gio Richardson is he's a bigger dude. He's obviously out of out of Phoenix, so he's an in-state guy. I like him. I thought that Arizona did a fairly nice job of holding on to him, and he's somebody that can I think he's going to be able to make an impact at some point. Now, let's talk. We're going to talk. Excuse me. Now, when it comes to this squad, though, the one thing that we just keep talking about is that offensive line. You've got to figure out this offensive line, and you got to figure this one out ASAP, because you can add all the skill position players, and this coaching staff, quite frankly, I think has done a very nice job of adding a lot of players. But on the offensive line, I don't know that any of them are actually real difference makers / real contributors. And I think that's where we need to, kind of where we need to figure that one out. But on the offensive line, if you can get that to be decent, I think you got some pretty talented guys. I think you got some pretty talented players to go with here, players to go with it there. So you got to figure that one out. I'm not thrilled on some of the O linemen, but again, hopefully, if they can become a unit that is good, it'll be a good thing for the University of Arizona. All right, now we are going to talk about realistic expectations here, but first, game time. Y'all know the drill with Gametime. Check it out. Everybody is using Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code. Spell Locked On College for $20 off. Download Gametime. What time is it? Gametime. Ooh. Now, with Gametime, the other great thing about it too is that you can you don't only have to use it for sporting events, you can use it for concerts, you can use it for a lot of different endeavors. So check it out. The great thing about Gametime as well is, again, people are using it. Word of mouth travels. Check it out. Gametime. Another one of these ones. You're going to thank me later at some point. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about where Arizona is now when it comes to what expectations should be. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say that I got any expectations for the defense, because I have no clue what to expect on the defense, especially on the defensive line. I like the secondary. I think the linebackers hopefully should be okay, but I obviously don't love the defensive line. So there's obviously that. So, but when it comes to the offense, if you can get a decent offensive line, I think the offense should be decent. Because again, I think they've done a very good job with the skill position. And not only do I think they've done a fairly good job with the skill position, I think that that these guys can play. They're productive. They've shown that they can play. So there's obviously that. But the offensive line still very much worries me. And again, I know the old cliche and it's true, but on the offensive line, everything starts in the trenches. That's where it's at. So there's obviously that. But I think this comes down to the offensive line, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how exactly this does play out. I'll put it to you like this. I'm cautiously optimistic about the offense. I like Doege. I think that Seth Doege he's done a very nice job, in his past, and I think that he's probably going to be able to get the best out of Noah Fafita. So we will, again, we're going to see how this plays out. But overall, I'm excited about all of that. But when I look at this, though, we're very much, though, in a prove-it situation here because, Brent Brennan was handed a pretty good situation last year, and, well, that bag was kind of fumbled. But to each and to their own. To each and to their own, we will find out how this does play out. Overall, I am not overall, I look at this, though, and we were talking about it before. I don't know what I'm looking at from a realistic expectation standpoint, because this is a situation where I think you're kind of like, 5 wins, at least show what you can do. That's, again, I know that it sounds cliche-ish, but that's just kind of where I'm at with this, where you just want to be able to see exactly. You want to see a vision, and so far I think they've done a fairly nice job this offseason of addressing some of the issues. We'll see on the football field, because at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. And but overall, I think they've done a decent job. Now, when it comes to the defense, though, I have no clue what to expect. I'm not a huge fan of Joe Sumalo, the defensive line coach. And I don't know that they've really added anybody on the defensive line that I look at and I say, well, that's clearly going to be a difference maker. So that's going to be an interesting situation to see how that plays out. But overall, at least it's a step in the right direction. We will find out how this does play out. As far as we haven't really talked about it, but as far as the kick return or the kicker situation, that's something you're going to have to replace Tyler Loop with somebody good, because Tyler Loop was probably your best player outside of T-Mac at times last year. So there's that. But again, this comes back to the offensive line. Okay, now tomorrow we're going to get into Arizona basketball, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to get into Arizona basketball. The great thing about Arizona basketball is that TCU is vulnerable. TCU is a team that how do I put this? You lose Frankie Collins, obviously, and you're in McHale. This is the kind of game Arizona needs to win. It's your first game of Big 12 play. You want to get to 1-0. Then you start looking at it and you're like, okay, you got some of these other games that I think are winnable as well. And and we're going to see how that all does play out. But overall, I'm fairly enthused by what if Arizona could get Caleb Love going, I think that this is a team where you're like, okay, things are looking up, because again, this team's going to go as Caleb Love goes. It's really that simple. And can KJ Lewis get back into that form we talked about, where he's kind of a secondary ball handler, kind of a tertiary player that can do a lot of different things. We know what Jaden Bradley can bring, and a big thing though too is up front the big men. They just got to be better. Not really sure how or what other way to put it. They just got to be better. I don't know though, because the thing with Trey Townsend that has surprised me is that he's been kind of a low effort player, and that was not something that I expected. I thought this was going to be a player that was going to be a kind of an all over the court, getting rebounds, things like that. He doesn't really box out. He just kind of hopes the ball. And he's kind of a turnover machine. Awaka, I'm a little bit bigger on than most, because there are times he can finish around the hoop and he can at least get rebounds. Henry, it's going to be big on Henry. And I would love to see Emmanuel Steven play a little bit more. I get there's limitations, and I get that, when you watch a player like that, they always look better because they're in limited. It's like the backup quarterback. Everyone's, unless it's Noah Fafita and Jaden DeLaura, you're always wondering why the backup quarterback isn't where it's at. But that is what it is. But Arizona, though, against TCU, game time's here. Big 12 play is here, my friends, and it's going to be fun to watch. Listen, Arizona, this team should be better than it's shown. I think they've shown some steps in the right direction, but they've got to continue to get better. And there's really no other way around it. This team should be an NCAA tournament team. And if they're not, then there's obviously some really big issues as well. Keep in mind, Haven't had a Power 5, Power 4 win here in a while. That would be nice to get off your back as you're heading into Big 12 play as well. Then your travel to Cincinnati later in the week. But it's here. It's going to be fun. It's going to be, in either way, nobody said back in the A was going to be easy, but that's all part of the game. So we're going to find out how exactly that does play out. But again, pretty much all basketball show tomorrow, and it should be a lot of fun. But on that note, though, very much appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. Bear down, back the A, and we will be back with you tomorrow.